don't want to record this.
Right. Hello, everybody. It is 2 o'clock, and I want to welcome you to our August 4th coffee shop. For those of you who have actually joined us for coffee shops in the past, we welcome you back. And for those who are joining us for the first time, we're really glad that you're here. If you could please just give us a quick wave or comment in the chat section to let us know if you can hear us, because we want to make sure everybody's going to be able to hear us. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much for those who can hear us. I'm glad. So first of all, I just want to do a quick introduction for those of you who aren't familiar with us at .org Solutions. We are a marketing, PR, and fundraising consulting firm located in Akron, Ohio. And we are really firm believers in professional development and helping others in the nonprofit space. So really the purpose of these webinars is to give some free help to nonprofits throughout the country and help them really understand more about particular topics that may help them do better. We know the times are really tough right now for a lot of you, and this is our way of pulling together a lot of people that we know in this space and have them share their expertise around particular topics. So the last time we did a webinar series, it was around taking your event virtual. This series for Coffee Shop is another 4-session webinar series. We are spreading them out this time over over 8 weeks, I'm sorry. And this time we're really focusing on getting ready for your year-end appeal. So as you're looking at your professional development schedule for the next month and a half, we do encourage you to attend all of these. They're kind of sequential on purpose, and I'll talk a little bit about the dates and the upcoming topics at the end of the webinar. Our whole .org coffee shop is part of our cafe series, which we have been launching over the summer and will continue to launch into the fall. Really all about professional development and giving you the tools that you need to do your job better. So before we get started, I'm just going to take a couple minutes for those of you who are new to our format to talk about how things will be working today. First of all, today is going to be, I'm going to be moderating this session with our guests who I'll introduce in a moment. We want to make sure that you have opportunities to ask questions. So we have an additional person on our team who is monitoring the chat box. So please feel free to use the chat box or the Q&A. At any time. We'll be taking calls at any time. So the panelists and the moderators are the only ones that are going to be visible on the call. So we're not going to be able to see you. You hopefully can see and hear us. So if not, wave and we'll make sure that we're staying online. I know there's some storms in Akron, so hopefully we'll be able to keep our webinars up and running. This is definitely an interactive session, but we're going to be doing it in a Q&A format. So we're not going to be doing any presentations on PowerPoint or anything like that. We do thank those of you who submitted questions ahead of time. We try to address those as part of these sessions. And if you were one of the people who did send us a question ahead of time, we don't answer that question, feel free again to put that into the Q&A or the chat box. We're going to make sure that there is time at the end of the session. So we're allotting about 5 to 10 minutes at the end of the session where you can submit your questions, and we will end the session with questions for our panelists. So today's session is talking about data, and the session title, I think, says it all. So diving into your data, using your donor data to drive results. This is the first part, as I mentioned, of our 4-part year-end campaign planning series. And I'm really excited today that we have a guest who is really knowledgeable about the data in this particular space. So I'd like to introduce Dan Barney. Dan is the principal of Red Barn Advisors, a consulting firm focused on data surrounding philanthropic support of an organization's operations, capital campaigns, and endowment initiatives. Dan is a former fundraiser like me, so all of us some of us get to that path through fundraising for a long time, but I do think that is really going to give a lot of this talk today context, because he really understands the need to bridge that gap between data, information administration, fundraising operations, and financial management. He has extensive fundraising experience and works with a wide variety of organizations, including healthcare, education, and social service. He's been instrumental in facilitating major gift fundraising initiatives that include transformational personal giving, direct mail, online, grants, and special events. He has experience with a lot of different database technologies, wealth screening tools, internet capabilities, particularly Blackbaud Razor's Edge, Crystal Reports, and Donor Perfect. He has mentored a number of startup businesses, has written and co-authored numerous articles, and spoken about information management and nonprofit operations at a variety of regional and national conferences. He has a Bachelor in Science from Indiana University's Kelley School of Business and an MBA from John Carroll Bowler School of Business. He lives in Avon with his wife, Trisha, his son, Peyton, who's celebrating a birthday today, and his puppy. I'm excited to hear about the puppy. We're all dog people here. But when he's not working with his nonprofit clients, he loves spending time with his family, world travel, woodworking, gardening, and cooking. So I welcome Dan Barney to our webinar today. Welcome, Dan.
Amy, thank you so much for having me.
So we're going to get right into the questions. So let's just start talking about data. I think for some of us, data is very exciting. For others, it's kind of a scary thing, but we all have data. We're drowning in it. Some organizations manage it a little bit better than others. But how important is functional and accurate donor data to our fundraising success?
Yeah, I know. I think anybody who's picked up the phone when the donor's called and you address them the wrong way, or the spouse has passed away, or you've been in a personal meeting and maybe the information you have on a major gift call isn't as accurate as you like. Anybody who's been in that experience certainly knows the importance of the accuracy of the data. I think where individuals struggle is the implementation of that. So putting a plan in place where they can capture the information structurally, they can manage it, they can maintain it, and then they can engage it. And good information management looks through that continuum to, again, not only gathering it and having a place for it to live in your database, but also having a plan to then put it into action that you can then measure, evaluate, and move on and continually improve, obviously, what you're doing and the success that you're having. So from my perspective as a data person, again, a former fundraiser, I find it very important.
So talk a little bit about, you mentioned like structure and how you manage it, evaluate and maintain it. Can you talk a little bit about that? And, kind of when we talked prior to this webinar, you mentioned really kind of starting at the end and working toward the beginning when you're thinking about all of these kind of things. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you were to liken your database to your house, right? If you were to build a house or plan to build a house, you would look at what is the infrastructure, what's the goal, what's the vision of my house, what's the vision of my database. Well, before you get to the end of the house and you've built and you've moved in and you brought your dog and your kid in, you need to know what the structure, the foundation, what is the mechanism by which you're going to do the capture. And so a good way to think in those terms is to think about what's the end product. So in terms of a database, you're thinking, what are the analytics? What does success look like? How do I measure the wins and the losses and do it in a way that is actionable? If I start at the end and I understand what I'm attempting to answer, the questions I'm attempting to answer, and the challenges I'm attempting to address, naturally, then I can engineer my beginning, my structure, my implementation, my maintenance, my utilization in a manner that's going to allow me to get to the point of an actionable analytic.
So like in the case of talking about a year-end appeal or planning for how your year-end is going to look like, understanding maybe right now the data collection is focused on how do I contact the people who I want to solicit as part of my year-end appeal, and what does that look like? Is that a fair way to look at it?
Yeah, and what's the messaging? I mean, for example, if you're looking at having particular messaging and segmentation, well, I know we'll get to that in a minute, but if you're looking at a specific type of message tied to an affinity that an individual organization has for you, you need to be able to capture that information, right? And you need to be able to wrap your message and your segmentation around that. So if it's important for me, because I have, let's go on a different path, I have a golf outing, and it's important for me to know that somebody golfs. That's a prospect for my golf outing. knowing the minutiae and detail of what type of club they hit and what kind of ball they use, what kind of hat they wear is inconsequential. And so you want to think about what's the value add to the capture of the data that ultimately results in a successful implementation of a year, in this case, a year-end appeal, special event. It frankly doesn't matter what the avenue, what the mechanism is by which you look to engage somebody. What you want to do is do it in a way that is thoughtful, that is actionable.
So basically what you're saying is just collecting the data is not enough. You need to know how you plan on using. Is that right?
Yeah, too often, I don't know who the audience is, but back in the day when I started 20 years ago, everybody got the Crane's Book of Lists, right? And everybody loaded the Crane's Book of Lists along with the new CEOs and the new development director's personal Rolodex into the database and expected that to translate into some sort of heightened support. Simply capturing the information doesn't serve a purpose if we can't employ it and engage it in a meaningful way that frankly sets you apart from your peers or your competitors, as nobody likes to use the term, but sets you apart and allows your messaging to resonate with the individual or organization.
Sure. So, I mean, so talk about like when we are collecting the data, you know, we are looking at, you know, how do we apply it, but it's also like, you know, managing it for different campaigns. So there's not just collecting the names and stuff, but it's collecting other key information. So, it's August. I mean, I can't believe it's August already. It's getting toward fall. And a lot of organizations might not even be thinking about their year-end appeal yet. Why is now the best time to take a look at your data and the information you want to use as part of that annual appeal, as opposed to waiting till like October or November, let's say, when you plan on mailing it?
Sure, absolutely. I think when you think in terms of the year-end appeal or any big push, any big initiative, right, you need that to fit into your broader development plan. And as you're ramping up to that action, whatever that initiative, whatever it may be, looking towards that, all that runway that comes up to that time leads up to it. So what do I need to do? What do I want to do to prepare for that year end? And how do I do it in a way that's going to complement what I'm already doing? So as an example, if we're looking at a database that has a lot of weaknesses, and you think in terms of a SWOT analysis of your database, right? What are my strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? If I know that I'm facing a database or I'm working with a tool that has some issues, some challenges, now addressing those issues and challenges now certainly is going to serve the organization far better than waiting until October, November, December when it's go time. Those challenges, those things that I need to address in order to get myself or get my data in a strong position for success will also lend themselves to those opportunities. What are, for example, when we talk about messaging, what are those types of defining data points that allow me to build a message around those? And so, you know, having a weak database that has disparate information all over the place that I can't capture or that is contradictory in nature doesn't serve anybody very well, and frankly can cause considerable confusion on both the part of the fundraiser and the organization, but also the donor and the prospect. And so doing all that due diligence, doing all that, one of my first clients had an expression, tend to your knitting. Tend to your knitting as you pull in now those more defining, those more colorful characteristics around which we can start to become more sophisticated.
So what are some of those things? So, I mean, there are some pitfalls that are probably pretty common, right? You know, things that we can fix, things that we, you know, so it's, you know, when the donor's spouse passes away and we inadvertently send them something addressed to Mr. and Mrs. When Mrs. is deceased, what are some, you know, simple things that everybody can do to start looking at their data?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one in particular is spot on, especially as you're moving into the holiday season. We don't want to be the one that resonates one's pain, right? Worrying about the moves, the NCOA. If you're using a mail house, when you send your bulk data over to the mail house, they're already running that NCOA, getting those updates. So having that mechanism in place where you are regularly addressing and updating your constituent files, knowing who's passed away and who's still living. Certainly calling somebody by their appropriate name means a lot, particularly given their affinity for your organization. If you have a direct connection to somebody, or they have a direct connection, and your organization is something like a school, you went there, you were a student, and you call me Mr. Barney, or you call me Dan, or you call me Daniel, or you call me Danny, any one of those things signal to me your connection to me. So making sure we're addressing people in the appropriate way, I think, is one of the first things that turns people on and turns people off. If you get an envelope and it's wrong, you get a letter and it's wrong, we get to know very fast as potential donors. And so worrying about that. The other one that I see when we have a large database with many generations or even multiple individuals from a singular household is making sure that we're communicating with either that household as an entity, particularly as it relates to sort of the communication education models, but then soliciting people appropriately as well. Sometimes it does make sense to solicit more than one person in a household. Sometimes it doesn't. And so you need to start to learn or know about the data and the constituents that live there. So that household management, that deceased management, that addressee salutation, that address management, those types of things, in concert with, again, sort of the broader orchestra of your organization. If you have a major campaign going on, or you have a bunch of NGOs in the field who are in that stage of cultivation, solicitation, moves, even post-solicitation, negotiation, early stewardship, we don't want that individual necessarily to now receive a piece of direct mail asking for $250 when they're considering a 6- and 7-figure gift. And so we need to figure out, how do we orchestrate all of that messaging around our data management environment. And some of those we can do now, and some of that we just have to think about now, so that when we extract the data, pull the trigger, whatever expression you want to use, that we've taken that into consideration and we can react to, both proactively and reactively, prepare the data in a manner that's considering the broader landscape.
Well, and I think it's also important, especially as you refer to the NCOA, or National Change of Address, when you're working, this is one of the advantages of working with the mail house, I think, is that even if you're doing a small mailing versus, maybe a couple hundred piece mailing versus a several, tens of thousands mailing, at least doing the NCOA once a year is really helpful, don't you think?
Oh, I do. And, many organizations, and as you mentioned, we work in Blackbaud, we work in Donor Perfect. There's about 300 or 400 different solutions out in the market. Now, between Donor Perfect and Razor's Edge, that's probably 60 or 70% of the marketplace, maybe more. But Razor's Edge in particular has an address finder service that you can run quarterly outside the context of your direct mail. And, excuse me, it's interesting to to learn how many people aren't engaging that service, oftentimes bundled as part of your existing contract. Donor Perfect has data enhancement services that are available as well. And there are other ones out in the market more broadly. Alumni Finder is one that schools use, for example, that's very, very prominent. So all of those services, starting to think about how can we tap into the broader information network that's becoming more and more readily available, serves us quite well.
And also, too, it's important, once you get those changes, to then re-upload them into your system. So if you're not able to have a system that's automatic, it's important to be able to upload that back into your system so you don't have to change that.
Without question. And again, those NCOA is one issue. And then you think compounding it a little bit, wealth screening and all these things that organizations invest heavily in, that we now start to keep separate lists here. I call rogue databases, a list here and a list here, a list here. And then in the 11th hour, November, December, leadership says, okay, pull it all together and get a mailing out. That's why we're talking about this now. We can't pull it all together and get a mailing out or get a mass communication out in a very short order when we have an environment that is attempting to pull in a bunch of seemingly disconnected, although ultimately connected data points.
Yeah, actually, can you talk about that a little bit more? Because I do think that that's one thing that we see a lot with clients is those rogue databases. So, the president's office keeps the updated information maybe for the board, and then they don't forward that along. Or our volunteer coordinator keeps something in an Access database that was built, 10 years ago. Or we have an Excel spreadsheet, and I'm not disparaging an Excel spreadsheet, especially for some smaller organizations, which that's what they have, and at least they're working with it. But talk a little bit about those rogue databases and how having a central data collection place is almost critical to your donor management.
Well, it's such a valuable and important point, right? You and I didn't talk about this before, but I'm glad we are now, right? It's the kind of thing that adds the nuance and the detail and the color and the complexion and all of the things that define or describe who our prospects and supporters are so often. So whether it's well screening or, for example, right before we started this, I'm working on an integration of alumni data for a college out east. Their internal staff aren't comfortable doing that. And so as a result, classes and classes and classes pass by, and before you know it, you're 2 and 3 years down the road, and you have not started to even educate these folks. So anytime that we have hospitals is another one, right? So patient data, we need to be cautious about prognosis, diagnosis, but we can certainly say date of service, department of service, and we can start to message around that. Well, if we have a separate database of census here for our patients, and we have our donor database over here, and then we have our board participation over here, and how do we message in a comprehensive, meaningful, hierarchical way where I can talk to the board as a patient or the alum as a board? How can I do that if all this data lives in separate spots? We simply can't. And so the challenge becomes one of territory. The president's office keeps the board's data because they know better how to manage it, which may in fact be true to an extent. And we keep the donor data because we know better how to manage, and we don't move that over here because we're not comfortable moving it. And so what ends up happening is we get a bunch of vertical data management environments, and we may have the office calling me as a board member, Dan or Danny, and you're calling me Mr. Barney, and the mail or the communication comes in within a week or two or a day or two. And so now the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. And that doesn't look good for a major university, let alone for a small community social service agency. So that messaging, that branding, how we address people, how we communicate with people, I think is important to speak with one voice to that individual from the organization, else we start to send mixed signals, right? And so the only way reasonably that we can do that is to pull that all into one central hub. The challenge that so often doesn't happen is that communication, that conversation to say, okay, you office of the president, you philanthropy office, you alumni office, what is the thing that makes your communication model different than my communication model, correctly or incorrectly, and how can we either bring those into alignment or respect the differences that we have? And we can bake all of that into one central database and have the opportunity to address that. The way I'm doing it may be worse, or the way you're doing it may be better, and I can learn from you. If we don't have those conversations, if we don't force our hand to explore that, I think we miss opportunity. We send messages, and it's a soft or an immeasurable damage that we potentially do to that messaging and marketing and branding and all the stuff that .org works so hard to build, right? And so we can start to facilitate the work that's happening around all the program, all the messaging, all the marketing, all the presence by simply having a centralized one central hub. Sounds great, I know. And people are sitting there going, yeah, that's never going to happen where I work. It's the kind of thing, though, it's a kind of hard conversation that has to happen. And again, whether it's because we could say, oh, okay, let's really bring it together. Let's work to climb this hill, or let's respect where we're different. Either way, there is value to that. So I went down a rabbit hole. You did it. It's your fault.
That's my fault. I know. But I think that's something so important to talk about. And then it kind of just is a really good segue into our next question, is really about like extracting that data once you do get it, or once you find where it is. So whether it's in your central database, whether it's held by the business office, whether you need to work specifically with your data services manager, it's often that, fundraisers don't have immediate access to that data. So it might be that, there's a centralized place that you have to go for the data, not knowing how to extract that data out of a system. What are some key things that fundraisers need to know and about working with those particular departments and in order to get the data that they want? Because I think a lot of times, and I made the same mistake as I was a fundraiser, and I learned over the years that, often what I was asking for, either A, wasn't really what I was asking for, or B, the way the system was set up wasn't going to allow me to get the information really that I needed in the way that I needed. So what are some ways that you can work with your data service or business office to get the data that you need for what you need to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is probably one of the most important topics that we can cover today, or really this quarter. You can have a fantastic data services team, an amazing DBA. You can have a star who's raising the money. You can have a fantastic CFO, CEO. All these people can be literally top of the mark. But if we don't start to communicate with one another in a meaningful and thoughtful way, then I start to, as the database administrator, I am forced in some measure to interpret what you're saying. And you're, in saying what you want, interpreting what you think I need to hear in order to give you what you want. So you start to get, it's almost like an internal telephone game, right? So I think what I need to tell the database administrator is I need this. And the database administrator says, well, they said this, and the last 4 times we did it that way, so we're going to keep doing it the same. Or I interpreted, or I heard something different. And what ends up happening is, as you start to try and, sharpen the pencil and get a finer point on what exactly your need is and what my deliverable is, you break down. I've seen this so many times. The leadership breaks down because it's too much detail. It's just too much to think about. Well, I don't know. Do I want to see people because I'm doing a reconciliation piece? Do I want, what happens with households? What happens with solicit codes? What happens with suppressions and flags, whatever system you're in? As soon as I, as a database administrator, start to interpret what you want and now translate that into code, tables, fields, you, as a people person who's out there, used to having conversations, you turn off, right? And so just give me what just do it the same as the last time. And the result is the data that comes out is not what you want. And so one of the biggest challenges I see is you can, again, have perfectly professional, wonderful people sitting on opposite sides of the table if you can get them to the table to talk about the minutia and the detail. But then that breaks down because we have really disparate, really different personalities. So what I would suggest to both sides of that house, without even talking about the business office for a moment, is that the fundraising leadership needs to understand that we, as the database professionals, we have to ask some of those laborious, boring questions because they are so systemic to the data that for us, answering a simple question about a solicit code or what address do you want to use or how do we address these people, Mr. and Mrs. or info, those are huge. That really speaks to the value of the product that we're going to give you. And oftentimes, leadership isn't thinking about that necessarily, doesn't want to think about it, or really is, they're on to that next big challenge. They just need to get past this hurdle. But there needs to be those hard conversations. And hard in terms of, again, 2 different entities trying to come together. And if we don't have those, I continue to interpret what you need. You continue to interpret what I need to hear to give you what you need. And so it becomes increasingly important to that end. The other thing I will state is, as a consultant, folks will allow me a little bit more leeway to ask those seemingly tedious questions because you're paying me as a consultant to ask those seemingly tedious questions. And so I'll have a tendency to get more action, more information from the entity. But those staff members who are on the data services side, need to pause and say, no, I really do need to know this question. And people on the leadership side need to go, she's not asking this simply, to be difficult. These are incredibly important things. The other question that you always need to ask as a data services side, and that you always need to answer as a leadership, in a leadership role, is the application of the data. How are you going to use that data? So often somebody will say, pull a list for me, Dan, that does this, whatever this is, doesn't frankly matter. And I'll say, well, how are you using that data? Well, we're communicating. Whoa. Are you asking for a gift? Are you educating them? Is this via e-communications? Is this snail mail? Are you picking up the phone? All of those things lead to a very nuanced selection within a selection. So a singular list of everybody who gave between $2,000 and $4,000. I know nobody asked for that. $2,000 and $4,000 over the course of the last 3 years only gets you to the point of starting. Once I then say, what is the application of that data? Is it reconciliation? Fine, it's financial. I don't want soft credits, right? Is it recognition? Great, I'm going to include deceased folks. I'm going to flag them as deceased, but I'm going to include them. Is it solicitation? Okay, then they have to be living and breathing, and we have to be able to reach them, right? And we have to call them by the right name, and we have to do all of those things. And so as you start to look at what the application is, that takes even the most basic segmentation and starts to funnel it into sort of sub-tracks of communication that we need to be sensitive to.
So I think, going back to your example earlier, we were talking about how you don't want to solicit someone who is in the major gift pipeline for $250 that is being talked to about a 7-figure gift. That kind of speaks to the fact that where you don't go to your data services person and say, hey, can you give me the LIBUNT list or the SIBUNT list? And then you just run with that, because the likelihood of those kinds of people being caught in that are very likely. Or you may catch somebody in that list who just made a pledge, but may not have been caught in a LIBUNT or SIBUNT list. So I think you're right. It's more important. I think almost even most important to maybe even start the conversation with your data services folks or the person who manages your data and say, like, this is what I want to do. Here's what I'm thinking. What's the best way for us to get the information that we need in the way that we need it? So
I think that's right. And I think there's an added value to that, if I may. So often, if you have a good database person who's technically savvy, right? And this isn't intended to be disparaging. It's data, fields, and clicks, right? Involving your data services team in those conversations, those broader sort of tactical, strategic conversations, now provides for me context around which I can make informed decisions as I'm clicking and managing data, right? If I live in a bubble and all I have are fields and addresses and deceased names, I'm going to code them as deceased, right? I get a list of 100 deceased people, deceased. I'm not thinking about, oh, wait a second, this is a major gift donor. They're deceased. Their widow has, I'm not thinking beyond the action. If I now start to understand philanthropy, and so often database people don't, they don't understand the essence of philanthropy. They understand donations, they understand transactions, they understand names and addresses. But if they don't understand the essence of philanthropy, they can't start to make informed data management decisions about, oh, okay, I have a X number of deceased people. When I see somebody who is a major donor, when I see somebody who maybe both people are alums, both people are patients, both people are beneficiaries, whatever, doesn't matter. I need to manage that differently, right? Or I will hopefully manage that differently, understanding more broadly the philanthropic environment than if I'm just click, deceased, done. I'm through my 150 names, next. And that's the danger, is that the data services team is a production environment, right? And so we want to temper that production. We still need them to process gifts and code folks and make address changes, but we want to temper that data management environment, that transactional production level floor, with a broader understanding about what are you as leadership or MGOs thinking about the next step on the horizon for the organization more broadly. And now I can start to answer the question, what do I do? Okay, Amy, you're in the middle of a campaign. I know you're working with 112 people. Is there anything I need to consider as I'm preparing for my year-end appeal, right? And some of those 112, you're going to say, fine, just put them in. Some of those 112, you're going to say, hold off. Some of those 112, you're going to say, well, I don't know yet. we're still dancing. We don't know what's going on yet. And so we can at least be in tune and prepared to respond to the eventuality of a potential change.
Which I think is another reason why it's so important to really start looking at our data now as we're planning our year-end appeal, because it gives you an opportunity to see what you have, what you don't have, and what changes you may have to make, which allows you to better segment that data. And sometimes, I've worked for large organizations that have, tens and thousands of names, and, being able to pull that data and having to work with that data takes time. I've also worked for smaller organizations and worked with smaller organizations whose data is the same kind of thing. It's going to take some time to be able to do that. So I think that's another reason to start working on that now. So I think it's a good, as we talk about, we kind of know, how we're talking to people. One of the other things we started talking about was like segmentation. So it's really the understanding of our audiences. And some organizations send the same messages to everyone. Others over-segment. You had a great story about over-segmentation, and they're just way too specific, and that becomes unwieldy and unmanageable. What are some practical ways to consider segmenting donor information for appeals?
Yeah, absolutely. And so just to recap, the short story you referenced had an organization, shall remain nameless, 3,000 piece drop, and there were 30 segmentations as small as less than a dozen in some cases. That seems very nuanced, very detailed, very time intensive, and I don't know what the cost benefit of that was, but common segmentations revolve around recency, frequency, magnitude, right? How recently did somebody give? Our live on SciBun non-donor conversation, our current year donor, we're asking for a second gift. Frequency, are they giving 16 times a year, 12 times a year for the last 30 years? So what is that frequency of their giving that speaks to their commitment? And then the magnitude, right? So I'm working with an organization right now where we're implementing a lockbox. In that implementation of a lockbox, we're starting to discuss what traffic is going to run through that. Well, we're not, I hope, going to ask for a $10,000 gift in direct mail along with the person I'm asking for a $100 gift, right? I want potentially, depending on, again, the broader landscape, I want to have that maybe as a special group we manage and handle a little bit differently. So recency, frequency, magnitude, those are common. You can then overlay the essence of your organization. What is the affinity base? And by that, I mean, if you're a school, you're talking about alums, you're talking about parents, you're talking about friends. If you're a hospital, right, you may be talking about community leadership stakeholders, where your entity, employees, a huge group at hospitals. They're commonly the largest or among the largest employers in the community. And so we should message and talk to them differently. If we start to talk, again, perhaps somebody is cardiac care or pediatric or whatever the affinity driver is, if we overlay that with recency, frequency, magnitude, we want to make sure that we're having a distinct message and actionable message, and one that's measurable, right? I don't think in most cases, now somebody out there is saying, no, that's not true. Mailing to 12 people and having a specific message to 12 people is valuable and important. Perhaps that is. For most shops though, if we could start to define standard sort of vertical lines of communication and keep relative consistency within those lines of communication, I'll get to that in a second, then we can start to measure our success. If we are constantly reinventing the wheel, it starts to become very difficult for us to evaluate the success. Can you see me okay? I'm getting a message, I'm unstable.
Yeah, you're okay. You're good.
Okay, well, no comments. So if we're constantly moving and changing and moving, it's hard to improve. So I think that, as we look to prepare for that year-end appeal, starting to define what those segmentations are, hopefully with some understanding of what's happened in the past, with a plan to now measure and improve our product as fundraisers, then I think that we can move forward and be more successful.
On
I
the
don't know if I
marketing
answered your
side,
question or not, Amy.
yeah, no, I mean, on the marketing side, we talk about this really as a persona development. So like who are your particular personas? So let's say you work for a social service agency and you have volunteers, you have employees, you have, smaller donors, major donors, event donors. There's different ways to be able to communicate with those particular people and being able to understand, where they get their information, how they like to be talked to, what's the best way to communicate with them, and really starting to build those personas. And you don't need a ton of them. That can be a great place to start so that you're not feeling overwhelmed by, having to put so many layers in and end up with that 30 segments, 3,000 piece mailing, which is, just not sustainable, I think. So we're starting to get toward the end. So we've got about 10 minutes left on the Q&A portion of this. So if you have questions, please start to put them in the chat now. We'll try to answer those as soon as we can. But one of the questions, and obviously we're here to talk about our year-end appeal, and we decided to do this in August to give people time to start thinking about what they need to do now. So, a database, I think, we all know is an organic, living, breathing thing. It needs to be nurtured, it needs to be cared for, it needs to be disciplined. I think I got that from you, so I'll give you credit for that comment. But what can we do today and every day, this week, this month, the next month, and the next 2 months to make sure that not only is our database staying that living, breathing, organic kind of thing, but also is able to serve us in the way that we need it to serve us come, October, November, and December.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot there, right? I think one of the first things that needs to happen is there needs to be an honest internal conversation, right? Do that SWOT analysis. And when I do, I'm going in, I'm talking to leadership, I'm talking to database administrators and processors, and I'm saying, what works and what can't you lose, what's broken, what do you need to fix? But have that honest conversation. And then as you're preparing for, the actual appeal, have the conversation with leadership. What is your thinking? Where are you moving this? What is the segmentation? Can I deliver on your vision? If I can't deliver on your vision of segmenting and overlaying recency, frequency, magnitude with affinity, if I can't, I now, on August 4th, have time to prepare for that. And so I can start to put a plan into place that will allow me to serve leadership in a meaningful way, right? If you're asking me to give you all your high wealth screen people that graduated in 1977 with a college, with a degree in computer engineering, and I don't have any of that information, you're setting me up for failure. And so again, that SWOT analysis, that honest conversation, starting to understand what your needs are, and then the work of actually implementing all of those things and bringing them into place. As you then move towards pulling data, what I'm going to suggest is you pull test data, right? You don't pull production data initially. You pull some test data in October after you get the data in, after you've addressed some of the weaknesses of your system. And you start and you flight those. You start to look at them, you test them, you challenge them, you overlay them, you make sure there's mutual exclusivity across those segments, which so often there isn't. You can have an alum who's on the board, and now the alum gets the alum mailing and the board member gets the board member. That's no good, right? And so as you start to test those things, as you learn things from that data on the extraction, we don't change it in the data, we change it in the database. That all takes time. And so as you move forward from August 4th to December, you're preparing for the vision as we thought it was in August, but in September, October, November, that vision may change, hopefully, because COVID's gone, the flying squirrels with sharp teeth are gone, and everybody's happy. And we can now start to message in a slightly different way, but we are in a healthy data management environment that allows us to be more nimble, even though we're preparing for an eventuality. And so again, that honest conversation, that honest analysis, that preparation, that addressing, that starting to pull in all those rogue databases and lists and making sure that there's consistency in your database, not contradictions. You start pulling in a bunch of disparate or external information into your database, you need to now test that validity against itself, because you may have something saying you're a flower and it says you're a vegetable. And you try and put those two things together and you have a vegetable flower. So you want to make sure that you're allowing yourself the time to provide a work product. And on those folks who are fundraisers, you want to make sure that you are providing your expertise to those data services, to those DBAs, to start to poke holes in what's being provided to you. They may not know that's a bad thing. They might not know that we don't want formal addressee salutations. They may be new staff members. I mean, we have chosen an industry of turnover. And so, you have a database person who changes, you have fundraisers who change, you have leadership that changes, you have board that changes, and they all come beating on the desk of the database administrator saying, this is how I want it. And so as you see that sort of evolution, that ebb and flow, at some point, we need to tighten those things up and have those conversations and actually act upon it. When we get the data, we want to fix it in the database, right? We don't want to fix it in the spreadsheet and then wonder why the problem occurred again in 2 weeks when we pull the real data.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think back to like my years as a frontline fundraiser, and part of our responsibility as fundraisers, I believe, is to make sure that we're passing along the information that we capture. So, it's a matter of, did somebody pass away? What is the protocol that needs to happen? So if somebody passes away, what's the database protocol? Who needs to know? Who needs to get updated? It's a matter of getting donations entered in a timely fashion so that, you have that. Yeah.
Because I know we're short on time. It's really important that those policies, those procedures, and those protocols are established and revisited. We don't put them on a shelf and let them collect dust. We reference those leadership changes. So not only is your database a living, breathing thing, those guiding principles, whether it's an SOP, whether it's those need to be living and breathing as well. And we need to have that healthy exchange in order for us and you to all feel like we're on the same page, pulling in the same direction.
Yeah, and I think too, and not everybody has a dedicated database administrator. I mean, there's some organizations where that is a small portion of a person's job. So to try to compare, an organization that has a team of, 10 people doing their database administration versus a person who might be the executive director, the administrative assistant, the fundraiser, and everybody else, still having what that protocol is going to be important, but it has to be right sized for your particular organization. And I also think too that that even if you can't do it every day, set those parameters as part of your policies and procedures. I'm
losing you. Are you still there, Amy?
I'm still here. I think Dan is glitching a little bit. I'm sorry, folks, so we're having some technical issues here.
We had storms up here too. They got pretty bad. So.
Yeah. So there's probably a lot of that. Plus, we always think about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. All the West Coasters are now online a little bit more actively too. But what I was saying is, I think that even if you're a small organization and you can't update something like every day or every other day, if you can at least kind of outline what that protocol and process is really important. And also, I think too, I'm a big fan of why keep things in your brain if there's a place that you can put it on paper or an electronic format. Being the keeper of the data and keeping all of the data in your head is not going to benefit your organization. So it's really important that anything that you have and about your donors is in a place that is available to others if something were to happen to you, whether you move on, whether you, are no longer in that particular position within the organization. It will save you a lot of time and energy along the way.
One thing I'll say, just to speak to the smaller shop, and I appreciate you bringing that up, is so often when I'm working with small shops, the person who was charged with capturing the data refrains from putting it in the system because they don't feel like they know where to put it, right? And so as a result, they either put it everywhere or they put it nowhere, and it's most commonly nowhere. What I'm going to suggest is, just as a guiding principle, and whether you're a fully seasoned database administrator or somebody in a one-person shop, being consistent in your data capture is important, so important. I would rather be consistent and wrong than inconsistent. If I'm consistent and wrong, I know where it is and I can fix it. If I'm inconsistent and on Tuesday I think it's a note, and on Wednesday I think it's an attribute, and on Friday I think it's I don't know, something in the address line. I'm never going to find it. And so consistency, being consistently wrong is an actionable thing rather than being inconsistent, which is just a horrible thing from a data perspective.
Yeah, so I think that's right on, because you can always pull consistently wrong data from the same place, but trying to aggregate it from 4 different locations is really, really difficult.
Yeah.
So just to kind of reiterate, what you can do today and every day is, be consistent, own it, and make sure that you're committed to the process is kind of what I'm hearing. This week might be a good opportunity, or this month a good opportunity to kind of do a SWOT analysis and see where you are and maybe run some test data. Next month, continue to kind of clean up that data. And in the next 2 months, continue to pull data and test that data and get ready for your annual year-end appeals. Is that pretty fair?
Yeah, I think that's, the Cliff Notes version, yes.
Okay, cool. So we have about a little less than 10 minutes. So if you do have any questions for Dan, please enter them into the chat or Q&A right now. Do you have any final thoughts, Dan, for us as we see if any questions come in and as we wrap up today?
Yeah, again, I think, when you talk about the year-end appeal, and you mentioned I was a former fundraiser, and I was, and we did about, I want to say 220 drops a year of varying sizes, anywhere from a couple of hundred to a couple 100,000 pieces of mail. And one thing that I think I took away from that is, being able to chart out what your plan is, and from a database administration perspective and information management, trying to map that into your database, facilitate it, and build it out in a meaningful way that allows you to look back and gauge success or failure, as the case may be. And there's nothing wrong with either, there's nothing wrong with not doing well in a segmentation if you take something away from it and are able to learn from it. If you don't know where you are, right, you can't know where you're going. So you need to be able to get that baseline understanding of what you're trying to accomplish from a messaging, from a data segmentation perspective, and take that and translate it. Don't just move on. So often I think what happens is at the end of whatever that fundraising period is, we either met goal or didn't meet goal, and we move on, and wash, rinse, repeat. To a certain extent, we start to do some of the same things, good and bad. And so we can't correct course or refine course if we don't take a moment, look back on the stable, measurable things that we did, and now start to explore opportunities to improve upon it.
Well, Dan, I want to thank you for coming and talking to us today. Data is something that I guess is very powerful. I always say that it's one of the most powerful things that a nonprofit owns. Is the information that they know on the people that support them and help them. And being able to have that data in a way that they can use it for solicitation and communication in any ways is really, really important. So we thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. And doesn't look like we have any questions. I'm sure everybody's like, oh shoot, I need to go make sure that all the deceased people are coded correctly, and I have a lot to do before November. So thank you again, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you, and thank you, .org, for putting all this together. This is fantastic. Really, really, you're doing a great thing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you to everybody today for participating in our session. We would like to actually, hold on just a second here, go over a few things. Again, we appreciate you coming. We do have a couple events that are coming up. So the first event is going to be, or the second event is going to be on 2 weeks from today. And that is going to be on actually working with the mail house and taking all of this clean data that you now have and putting it into action. On September 1st, we're going to be talking about actually putting together your timeline. And I know that seems like maybe we should have done that first, but we talked a lot about that here at .org, and we felt as though that kind of giving you a little bit of time to understand your data and work on that, and then talk about mailing, and then get your timeline together, knowing what we have learned from these experts would be really helpful. That session is actually going to be somewhat interactive, where we will provide you with a template that you can use to build your own timeline. You can even work on it when we are actually on the webinar. And then the last one is going to be on the 15th of September, and that webinar is actually going to involve putting together your copy. So we're looking at developing dynamic copy for that session. So we hope you can join us for those sessions as well. We always are looking for feedback, we're looking for suggestions, and we're looking for just kind of how you feel about these particular sessions, whether they are helpful to you or not. Hopefully they are. It just helps us make things better for you, and gives us an opportunity to make the best use of your time. So again, we thank you all for attending today. Registration is open for our upcoming sessions, so you can register for those at any time. You can visit our website at .orgsolutions.com/events, and all of our events will be on that particular page, so you can register at any time. Again, thank you for attending, and have a great day.
Thank you.